Hey, everybody, and welcome once again to the Real Comics Podcast. I'm your host, Felipe, aka Voodoo57, and with me, as always, is my good friend, Andrew, aka Speedy G33. Andrew, how are you doing today?
Doing awesome. Top of the morning, mate.
How you doing, bruv? That's right, bruv. We're throwing on our English accents today because today we are going to be giving you our review of the Kingsmen 2, The Golden Circle. But before we get into that whole total intro and everything, let's break down what the movie's about and who's in it, shall we?
We're from the Kingsman tailor shop in London. Maybe you've heard of us?
The Kingsman 2, The Golden Circle is directed by Matthew Vaughn, okay? And in this movie, before I throw the intro at you, it stars Taron Egerton as Eggsy, Mark Strong as Merlin, Colin Firth as Harry Hart, a.k.a. Galahad Sr., Julianne Moore as Poppy, Jeff Bridges as Champagne/Champ, Channing Tatum as Tequila, Pedro Pascal as Whiskey, and of course, Halle Berry as Ginger Ale. These are some great names. Now, the story behind the Kingsmen kind of goes like this. With their headquarters destroyed and the world being held hostage, the Kingsmen must journey and discover their allied spy organization in the U.S. These two elite Secret Service organizations must band together to defeat a common enemy. Andrew, what are your initial impressions of the Kingsman 2, The Golden Circle?
It was an excellent ride. I had such a good time watching this movie. Very entertaining. Very, very entertaining. It was over the top. It took me back to the world that I was in before in the first movie. It suffers a little bit from that sequel thing that happens with sequels, but for the most part, it was really good. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah. I'm going to go right along with you. It was very entertaining, much more than I thought. The initial reviews from others that came out weren't exactly sparkling, but I found myself totally involved, totally entertained, totally alongside all the characters that were returning from the previous Kingsman movie. And this made for a great, a decent sequel. It does have its issues, which I'm sure we'll talk about more about in spoilers. But I found it entertaining enough to definitely recommend. If you enjoyed the first one, especially, I think that you could stay right on par.
Oh yeah, I definitely. If you enjoyed the first one, I think you'll like this one. Some of my concerns is that when they were going to go into the Statesman, that it might be a little too Americanized. And one of the charms of Kingsman is the British story that it's telling with very British, cultural references and things of that nature. So I was a little concerned with that, but I didn't have it afterwards. The new actors really add to it. The old actors, it's good to see them again. It's not perfect. Nice, it's a very good movie to enjoy with some popcorn. Yeah.
Exactly. It is the perfect popcorn movie, especially with things kind of winding down a little bit. You're looking for something to go out and watch if you haven't caught it. I think it's honestly, it is made to honor movies like James Bond and other spy movies out there, Man from U.N.C.L.E., whatever. And I thought that it hit all its marks. I thought it did very well. I was more surprised. I thought I was going to be, I thought I was going to be a little bit more disappointed, but I wasn't. I found myself laughing a bit more in this one and enjoying getting to know the characters once again. And I thought the way that they had done some of the things with the characters, the new and the old, bringing some of those old characters back, I thought they did them in a really good fashion. So that was one of my key worries, was how do you bring back certain people and keep them in the mix with the new characters? I thought they did a great job.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't read any reviews, so I went in completely blank because I tend not to. I just don't want them to kind of sour my judgment on a film and go in fresh as I can. I guess I'll have to find out why they didn't like it. And maybe it's that it's not quite perfect. Maybe it's that it's a little more comic booky maybe than the first one. That'd be a little complaint that I could see people saying. It's a little more outlandish, and you have to suspend, that belief system and ride along in the fantasy that you're in. But I just don't see what's bad about it. I mean, yeah, it's not perfect, but come on, did we expect the perfection that's coming out in September. We don't get perfect movies in September very often.
No, I'm right on par with you here as well. I think generally I try not to, but my Twitter feed is set up in such a way that it's part of many people's headlines, this or that. They give their opinions, unfortunately, that lead into their articles and or their own personal reviews. So I kind of get spoiled that way, and that's where my head kind of goes. But I think a lot of people expected this one to be better than the first, and I wouldn't necessarily say that at all. But it was still an enjoyable movie. I think it was on, personally, a level playing field.
I think it was always going to be hard pressed to be better, because if you know a little bit about the comic book background, which we'll get into much later, the first one had a comic book to base it on.
Right.
The second one, Vaughn wrote an original story because there isn't a comic book. So with an original story, it's a little harder sometimes. He's completely going from scratch. And, he didn't quite maybe hit it everywhere he wanted to hit it. So,
yeah, I could kind of see some of that. And again, this is, it might throw some people for a loop, some of the things that are in this movie. But I still think the fun overweighs its issues and problems in structure and how they do things. But once again, you and I are going to get into spoilers. When we get into spoilers, we're going to break some of that down, and I'm going to give you some facts. And I know you have some information on the comic book side that I'm definitely looking forward to hearing you share to give to people out there who may be listening. Yep. Well, what else would you say about this movie that you could tell somebody that's in our non-spoiler section?
Just go in with an open mind to have fun. That to me is the key. Sometimes we get so caught up in the perfect movie and the perfect villain and oh my God, the twist. It's pretty predictable. It's a predictable, you can see it coming, what's kind of going to happen. But if you just have fun and enjoy the performances, they're really entertaining, and just enjoy the action, and it's well filmed and there's great music in it. You'll have a good time. Just go to the movie to have fun, and you will have fun watching this movie.
It's definitely a romp, and you definitely do have to just understand that this is going to be over the top. It is designed to be a little bit over the top and mimic some of those spy classics that you and I both love, or anybody else who goes to see it. But we do say, check it out. So with that said, my friend Andrew, should we get into our spoiler section already?
Yes, let's get into some spoilers.
All right. So with that said, then let's get into some spoilers for the Kingsman 2, The Golden Circle. All right, Andrew. So this is going to be our spoiler portion. Folks, you have been warned. If you're joining us right here or still listening, we are going to get heavy and deep into the Kingsman, The Golden Circle. We've got a lot of factual stuff we want to discuss, but I think the first topic that I want to bring to your attention and get your thoughts on is the hard R in this version, the sequel version to the Kingsman franchise.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard R. That's the only thing. This is not a family-friendly film. If you're thinking of taking teenagers, you might want to see it first, engage on your teenager before you give the thumbs up on them seeing this movie. It was kind of R in the first one too, but yeah, the language is heavy, the violence is pretty heavy, in a tongue-in-cheek way, but it's still there. And then there's some sexual stuff that gets a little borderline creepy.
Okay, we've gotten definitely a lot more risque in this movie. This is the reason we wanted to bring it up. In the original movie, there was definitely a moment that kind of set you back, and I can tell you from some of the information due to my research here that was set up particularly to poke a jab at one of the Fox executives, which I found very funny, thinking that person would be upset and ask Matthew Vaughn to remove it, but instead this particular executive went ahead and said it fit okay with the movie. So not only in this movie do we have a callback to that particular scene, which has to do with a particular way people have sex, that they added something even more, pushed the limits a little bit further. And let me tell you about that specific scene. In this scene, Eggsy, our hero, needs to implant or insert a tracking device on the girlfriend of the right-hand man of our villain in this movie. And by that, he literally has to insert this. So what I found out doing my research was that Egerton was so uncomfortable doing this scene that when they show this hand in the movie going down that direction, that's actually the hand of her real life husband, Poppy's real life husband. So yeah, it even got to Egerton to not want to do that part of it. He's like, no, I don't want to do that. What are your thoughts on how graphic these scenes are kind of getting in this franchise?
My mind was blown with that, because you want just the hand going down her belly and maybe seeing the top of her underwear or something. That should have been it.
That's what we said.
But it keeps on panning down and it keeps on going. And next thing you know, we flash to a scene of which we must assume is within her body.
Yep.
You know, and I was like, whoa. Yeah, that just boggled the mind.
It makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah,
just kind of discussing it, but you know, I mean, not that I'm not, you know, that much, but geez, and to learn that he wasn't even comfortable doing the scene.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. But you know, I told you I was even worried when they were having a discussion, Eggsy and Whiskey, Pedro Pascal's character, where they were going to implant it, and they were kind of approaching her at the bar. I was like, are they going to like grope her here at the bar?
Yeah,
they wouldn't do that, would they? Holy crap, they're not going to do that, are they? I didn't know where they were going with this.
No, they just upped their game and made it consensual, but still went that route. Yeah, definitely a hard R, people who are listening to our spoiler section. Please be aware that, yeah.
Well, we had a couple walk out before, but it was before. I'm pretty sure it was before that scene, but the language was pretty heavy in this movie, so maybe the language was a little too much for them.
True,
and they walked out.
Yep. There's also a scene with a meat grinder. We have a would-be bad guy bringing in a possible recruit to our evil villainess, Poppy, and she tells him to put his buddy into the meat grinder.
Yeah.
And pretty much without hesitation, we get a very graphic meat grinding scene and hamburger.
Yeah, hamburger made from the guy, supposedly.
Oh my goodness.
It's pretty, yeah. It's not surprising. There's a couple of things going on here. If you read Millar's comics, he goes there. He went there in his Ultimates when he wrote Ultimates with Marvel. He goes there in Kick-Ass, another comic he writes. And then Vaughn, we're talking about the guy that had some writing to do in Lock, Stock, in Snatch, in Pound Cake, those types of movies where there's a lot of cussing in the dialogue for those movies as well. So
layer cake,
excuse me. I said Pound Cake. Layer cake. Yeah.
No worries.
So when you know that the director we're dealing with, and we're dealing with a comic based on another guy that writes kind of, you know, isn't shy about dropping some F-bombs and stuff, you're going to a place that's a little more adult than the average person might care to go.
Oh yeah, for sure. And of course, we're talking the violence within this movie is definitely a lot more graphic than the first, but you know, and I call this John Wick syndrome. And this isn't the first film. I just noticed a lot more films following from here on out, that whole John Wick genre of headshots and things like that. While it totally fits that scenario in those two films, I think they're carrying over into other films.
It's a general tone that was set in Deadpool. I mean, and also the first Kingsman, but Deadpool, you know, has made it really okay, even though we're you know, this is going to be pretty violent, because Deadpool is pretty violent when you break it down. And then if you look at this year, we've had Logan. Logan was extremely violent. We had John Wick. We had Atomic Blonde. There's been some movies that have really pushed the violence, you know, in an action way. So, it's par for the course. Kingsman's not doing anything that nobody else isn't. You know what I mean?
This is very true. And I give them credit, because it's not done in just a walk-up shoot manner. There's a little ballet that ensues around this, very much, you know, an emulation of what some of John Wick has brought to the forefront, the way that they dance around and use their weapons, or what they may have, or when Harry uses his umbrella, and some of the other characters, which we'll get into here shortly.
Yeah, it falls somewhere in between John Wick and Deadpool. It's not as outrageous as Deadpool,
Right.
You know, Deadpool is super outrageous, but it's not serious like John Wick. It still has that comic book, tongue-in-cheek type, you know, people getting severed with electric lassos and, you know, killed with umbrellas and just all kinds of crazy gadgets that, you know, make you just kind of giggle to yourself like, whoa.
Right. Rocket and machine gun briefcases. Yeah, that kind of thing, which we've seen before in the past. Thank you, Robert Rodriguez.
Yes, that was a little steal from Once Upon a Time in Mexico there. Or
That's
is it
for sure.
Desperado?
Desperado is where they use those prevalently. Yeah.
Okay.
So for sure. But great. Then let's talk a little bit, though. Let's move on from our hard R conversation to let's talk a little bit about the Kingsmen themselves. Harry, Eggsy, Merlin, Roxy. They're all back from the first movie. What did you think about their portrayal in the movie and how they fulfilled it in the second?
Well, it's funny you mentioned Roxy. Roxy wasn't back for very long.
No.
You know, spoiler, we lose Roxy. I think Roxy had to go. You and I talked about it. I'm sure that upset a lot of fans, but I think she had to go. And whether she's dead or not is a whole different argument back. But she needed to be not in this film to tell the story they chose to tell of Eggsy in this film. So
right.
I just felt, you know, they concentrated a lot about his relationship with his girlfriend and having a kind of pseudo second romantic interest because, you know, it's there between the two of them. There's that possibility, and shippers want to ship them together and the whole work. So they kind of had to remove her from the scene. And I'm sure that upset some people, but.
Right. What I liked about it is I think they did a really good job of taking Eggsy, Egerton's character, and maturing him in a way that he's starting to realize that this life comes with consequences.
Yeah.
And I liked that a lot. And there to play his surrogate father early on is Merlin. And of course, later on when there's a reveal that Harry is still alive, you know, he's there to kind of come back from his issue and back that up even more. So that world can continue on and he can find a way to fit himself within that world. And that's what I really liked about this version of this group of Kingsmen.
Yeah, I think that's true. It was done really well. It built the characters up. It just didn't move them stateside.
Right.
They were, and you know, the first part, it opens in England. And if you've seen the trailers and all right, this is spoilers anyway.
Yeah.
You know that they're blown up. The Kingsmen are blown up. And so there's less of them, but you do get a lot of them in England. And even when they do move to the States, they still hold that English sensibility, that English style of movie. And they're still very entertaining. It's still about the suits and the gadgets that are very English. So I was really happy with that. And that was one of my biggest concerns going in, as I said in the non-spoiler, that with them going to the U.S., would it change this movie and it'd be all Americanized, which would lose the charm of what the Kingsman is. And it didn't. It kept all of that.
Right. It's definitely a Brit movie. I mean, to me, that is still from the British point of view, looking at us cowboy Americans when they kick over and they have to join forces with the Statesmen. But since we're on the topic here, let's talk a little bit about the Statesmen. We've got Champ, aka Champagne, played by Jeff Bridges. We got Tequila, played by Channing Tatum. We got Ginger Ale, played by Halle Berry. And of course, we cannot forget Mr. Pedro Pascual as Whiskey, or as I call him, aka Burt Reynolds in this bad boy. That's for sure. What did you think of our new group being introduced, our Statesmen? What did you think of them?
They were so good, and that's something I didn't expect. They were so entertaining. It was their own group. They didn't feel like, okay, this is just the Kingsmen in America. You felt like this was a different group. You know, the types of, you know, using the pistols and the lassos and just shotguns and, you know, the cowboy hats and boots. And yeah, you know, Jeff Bridges with his chewing tobacco. Everyone's chewing, you know, it was very good. It was a stereotype on us,
right,
done by a British writer and a British director telling the film, but I didn't feel it was insulting at all. And it was a lot of fun. And, you know, and specifically, I was happy with Pedro Pascual. You know, we talk a lot about representation in film and Latinos. Why don't we have more? We had a great Latino. He was a major part of this film. And I wish people would talk a little more about that instead of complaining that we don't have him. We just had a great one. So. Yeah,
that's for sure. We're going to talk about him twice because he not only plays a hero statesman, he's actually also a co-villain in his own right separate from what's going on. He tends to have his own agenda, and I'll bring that up here in spoilers. But you're right. Everybody hits a note. A couple of fun facts that I found, as always, in my research. Jeff Bridges modeled his character after his father in Airplane, along with his portrayal of a couple of cowboys and westerns that he did. That's what he kind of did. And back to Pedro Pascal, there's a scene that is not in this movie that involved a mechanical bull. And what I found out was they took 4 days. They had him for 8 hours for 4 days straight, strapped to a mechanical bull trying to film a particular scene, which they finally got that never made it into the movie. And what made it worse was the fact that poor Pedro Pascal was, he's had a bad back ever since his fight way back in the days with the Mountain in his Game of Thrones stunt days.
Oh, wow.
So he had to endure that, only to be told, sadly, that scene wasn't even going to be included in the movies. I am hoping that's going to be in the DVD. Yeah, I'm hoping it'll at least be there. So give me your take on the American Brother. I mean, I know you've mentioned it a little bit. How do you think they fit in, though? Did they do well being part of the Kingsman Secret Service?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I thought they were perfect. I liked the interaction between Merlin and Ginger when they're sitting there and they're kind of talking and discussing it. And they're both kind of tech nerds, but she wants more. Then Channing was funny as hell.
Yes.
And like you going in, I thought Channing was going to be.
He was going to be the downfall of this thing.
I really did. I thought he was going to be the villain. So that was a nice little trick. After that, it's kind of obvious where it's going, but that was a neat little trick. And yeah, I mean, just everything about them. Like I said, they felt like their own thing. And that early scene when Channing Tatum, when Tequila is interrogating them.
He's interrogating them.
They've captured the Kingsmen. The Kingsmen broke into their secret hideout, whatever. And he's interrogating him, and they're just going back and forth, making fun of each other's booze, making fun of each other's the way they dress. Just it's perfect. It's like classic. Like neither of them's willing to back down, and they're basically telling each other to F off. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was very good. One other thing too, I forgot to mention. Pascal also, they asked him who he modeled his character after. He said a combination of Burt Reynolds.
Nice.
And James Coburn, which I thought was interesting.
Coburn. Yeah, well, Coburn is interesting in Magnificent Seven. Yeah, that's cool.
So I kind of got that feel for sure.
It was cool because he was a vaquero. He really felt like your Texas Latino Tejano vaquero kind of guy, and it was really cool. Yeah, I had a good time.
Liked it a lot. Or skipping rope, as they say in the movie. All right, so we've talked about it's a lasso. We've talked about the Kingsmen. We've talked about the Statesmen. Talk about go ahead.
One last thing about the Statesmen is what I thought that was really cool was the clever use of the alcohol in this movie.
Right.
They're constantly drinking, and they're constantly going back and forth, like
Scotch or whiskey.
Fun. It should be Scotch. It shouldn't be whiskey because they're from European. And then Jeff Bridges has the tequila moment where he even spits it out like he's peeing. I don't know if that's a joke, like tequila tastes like piss or something. I don't know what he's doing there, but he spits it. I mean, just the constant drinking was a lot of fun. It kind of mixed in, and I like in the end they even decide to now the Kingsmen are in the booze business.
Yes, they're gonna help the Kingsmen rebuild by opening up a facility in, I believe he said Scotland.
So they're going to make scotch.
They're going to make scotch in Scotland, which I thought was fun. There's a quick moment I wanted to, before we transgress into the next thing. There's that scene, probably the biggest laugh for me. Jeff Bridges slides over that Statesman whiskey bottle, opens it up, sticks his middle finger in there, and he just rubs it across his you and I we were just dying. It's just rubbing it and smelling it, and I'm like, what did he just do?
Yeah.
It's a great little moment. They
got great actors, and these actors have these little moments that they made choices themselves. That's not direction. Jeff Bridges probably just decided, I'm going to do this. Yeah, right here,
Yeah, he was always doing something with the whiskey, tapping his finger and
Channing when he's under the influence of the drug, and he's like in his underwear and his boots and his hat, and he's in the hallway just dancing, doing cowboy dance.
His bad impression of Magic Mike. Yeah, that was a funny moment. So, all right, we've talked about both of those groups. Let's talk a little bit about, should we talk a little bit about like spy organizations in general through the eyes of Brits? I mean, have we hit that note enough to where?
I think we have.
I mean?
I think we have.
Yeah,
I mean, it's definitely, this movie is through the British perspective,
right?
And that it still stays that way. And again, that was one of my fears going into, they were going to Americanize it, and they don't. It's very much a British film.
Well, which is good, because they, in a very polite way, they making fun of us, but in a strong way. Where the characters are all still very strong characters in their goofy cowboy way, so to speak, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about the villains. Let's get on to the villains. All right, we've got Poppy and Charlie, the ex-Kingsman. He didn't make it. He was rejected. And, of course, we find out later in the film, Whiskey. Were they effective? Did they make good villains for you?
They did for a while, but it kind of fell apart as we hit the end. But like, I really did like Julianne Moore as Poppy early on. I mean, her little one-liners and her quirkiness really worked for me. Now, again, that's where I get into it, where it's a little bit comic booky. You have to really suspend that there's this woman in a jungle who has built her little hideout based on the 50s and has a little diner and eats burgers made out of people and all these crazy things that happen in this place. But her lines were funny and she delivered them well. And Charlie was a pretty good villain. For the most part, he's the one that handled a lot of the fighting and the action stuff with Eggsy. So, and he did a good job of that. And then later we get Pasquale, and you and I talked about it. We saw it coming. It was kind of obvious, and I'm not sure they handled it well at the end. So
that would be a definite knock. Yeah, I think it could have been very different, but we're still going to talk about that. You brought up Poppy, and let me give you a couple things on this. And I think this is why you like her, and definitely why I like her. You know where she took her inspiration from completely, and only one person and one performance. Her and Matthew Vaughn discussed the villain, and they wanted her to be somebody that was evil but polite. And the closest comparison they came up with, and she said she watched the movie in order to prepare, was Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor in Superman.
Interesting. That
he was very evil in being polite, in discussing things. And that's why she's so kind of over the top and sweet in her own way. But like when she told the guy to throw her buddy into the hamburger, she says, "I need you to show me some loyalty." And she says it with a sweet mommy smile. And so it was interesting to see that she took some of the inspiration from him and that performance.
It was a really good performance. I think she was cheated a little on her death. It was a little too
That was dumb. Yeah.
But up until that point, I found her very entertaining, and I felt her a good villain, and it fit the sensibility of this whole film. You have these guys, they're having their ridiculous conversations about stuff. So it's okay for the villains to be a bit ridiculous as well. So yeah.
That's for sure. I agree. She was the best part of that thing. And the set design of the diner and the theater and all that stuff, they actually had some influence from Martha Stewart in the way they designed all that stuff, which I find very funny. And one of the actors, I neglected to write the name down, so forgive me, but one of the actors at the very end of this movie, they were just going to destroy everything on set. He loved the diner specifically so much that he took that back to England with him. They tore it down in sections. They rebuilt it, and it is now a diner, an actual diner. Wow. You can visit, which I thought was very cool.
Very cool.
Definitely very cool. Whiskey's turn from good to bad. What did you think of that part of the film? I was a little, I didn't mind that he turned bad, but for me, I thought that the way he went out could have been different. What do you think?
Yeah, and we kind of talked about his motivation didn't quite make sense.
Right.
Like when it's because his fiance was killed by, it was drunk drivers, or was it meth
drug
heads
dealers?
Shot her?
It was drug dealers or meth heads. Yeah.
And when they first started kind of hinting on that, he's talking to Ginger Ale, right? And so I thought that whole thing was going to be about, that's his reason why he doesn't want Ginger in the field.
Right.
Because he doesn't want Ginger to get killed. But that's not where they went at all. And then they get to the scene and he says, that's my reason why I'm against all this, and all these people that broke the law need to be punished. And it just, I don't know, it just didn't make sense.
Yeah, we're talking about a scene in which the premise is that these people all have a virus. Millions of people have a virus, and without an antidote, they will all die. But most of them have the virus because of some type of drug use. Whiskey decides that they should all die because of what happened to his fiancée. I thought there was an opportunity for a saving grace because the character was so good that they could have turned him back to the light side, as I like to say. But they didn't. But what else they did was they had an action sequence involving him, a fight out with him, separate from our villain after the fact, which I thought extended the film a little too long. Did that bother you at all? I thought it went on a little too long. I just didn't think it was necessary at that point. Perhaps if they would have staged it prior to the villain actually going out the way she did, maybe it might have fit. What did you think?
Yeah, it did feel weird coming after the major villain's death because it just really didn't make sense why he wanted to still attack him at that point.
Right.
Unless it would have been better if he was working for her, like he took the money, and they do kind of hint that he's all about making money, but it's just not developed well enough. At the very beginning of the movie, they talk about how he's making all kinds of money and he's got his big tower and everything, but it's just not done well enough for me to care, I guess. The action itself was interesting.
It was great.
It was a lot of fun, but yeah, his motivation is a little off.
Yep. I think if I had one knock on this film, and it's a big knock, if honestly, which, like I said, which keeps it even keel for me and not making it a great film, was the fact that I think it went a scene too long. And I don't think that they handled his transition into or the discovery of him actually being a bad guy very well. I think that was a little rocky. Yeah. So any further thoughts on our villains?
No. Overall, I think they were pretty good for what they managed to do what the film needed it to do. They showcased the heroes in a good way. They provided some laughs. They moved the plot along, and until we hit that final act where it just they didn't seem to know quite how to end it, I feel like.
Right. I agree with you. All right. Well, let's get on to our next subject. This one's going to be a plus and a huge minus. Let's talk a little bit about our cameo in this film. And before I do, I want to tell you that this person was actually invited into being the first film, but rejected it. Didn't want to do it. He didn't want to be in it. And we're talking about Sir Elton John. Sir Elton John has a major kind of role in here. He's a kidnapped character who ends up getting these moments of being seduced by the drug and, making innuendo as to, some of the other things, the scene in the first movie and all. Yeah. What did you think about Elton John's role in this movie, first off?
There is definitely a cheeky wink to the first movie on that one. Now, Some interesting facts I can give you from the comic book. The original Secret Service Kingsman comic book, the plot is that somebody is capturing celebrities.
Right.
And one of the celebrities is Elton John in the comic book. Mark Hamill is also one. That's why they used Mark Hamill to play a character in the first one. So, yeah, they definitely wanted him in it for the first one for that reason. And you're right, he turned it down. So I'm not shocked that they got him in this one. He probably saw the first one and saw what it was and was like, yeah, I'll be a part of that. So it was pretty cool having him in it. I just wonder if we had too much of him in it.
I'm going to say yes. And again, this would be another knock for me. And that's why I didn't mention it in the beginning part, because the only way to mention it is to actually spoil it. I thought there was a little too much Elton John. Now, if you look very closely, Elton John is actually on the marquee in the theater where he's actually playing. Plus, they used his music in the film. And I don't know if you noticed it, but the robo dogs that are in this movie that are pretty cool, they're named Benny and Jet.
There you go.
So along with that, and there was a life save by Elton John, which I thought was kind of dumb.
And there was a Matrix kick by Elton John.
Oh yeah, there was a Matrix kick and a wink to the camera.
Yeah.
By Elton John. I think they went a little overboard. There was a moment where he beat the crap out of somebody using the piano, and I would have been just good with that. Yeah. That made me laugh. But you're going to extend into this other thing, and yeah, we went a little overboard with Elton, but can you have too much Elton? Andrew, you tell me.
I think in this case, there was just a touch too much. That's just my personal. Now, does it take away from the film? No, but you're going to kind of roll your eyes at some point, like, oh my God, this guy. You know, okay, I laughed at the joke the first 3 times, but this 4th time, I'm done with him. I'm done with him. Get him off the screen, please.
Yes, there was a lot of Elton John in this movie. I could have done with a lot less. Not to
because
say that
he's not an actor, and so you hit a point where it's not funny anymore. Hearing him say drop F-bombs, okay.
Right.
So it's like, okay, Elton John dropping F-bombs isn't as funny the 5th or 6th time he drops the F-bomb. It just isn't.
Yep, definitely one of my not favorite parts of the movie. But like I said, it started off funny, but they went a little too far with the gag for sure. All right, so Andrew, with all that out of the way, I'm going to impartake you to help me and the people who may be listening to talk a little bit about the comic book angle. Talk to me about Mike Millar and the Millar world and how this all sets up and enlighten us from the comic book end of this side of film.
Yeah, Mike Millar is a comic book writer who specifically worked a lot with Marvel. He worked for, DC as well, but he did a lot of major comics for Marvel during the Ultimate era. So he wrote something called the Ultimates, which is his kind of take on the Avengers. He also wrote Fantastic Four Ultimates. He's a big part of Civil War. And so I mentioned this because the MCU that we have now really borrows from him. So all these movies we're seeing, his fingerprints are all over him, all these Marvel movies. The Fantastic Four movie that Fox tried to do definitely also borrowed from him. And then he moved on and he started creating his own comics, create our own stuff. So he could own the stuff himself to do things he wanted. And some other examples of stuff that are out there that you've seen that are Mark Millar related is Kick-Ass. That's him. That's his comics, creatively owned. He owns that. The Wanted. That's with Angelina Jolie and not Fassbender. McAvoy. Samuel L. Jackson again, who pops up everywhere. Right. And so the Kingsman is another one of his properties. And why that's kind of important, because Millar World just signed a deal with Netflix. So you're going to see a lot more of his comics that he created popping up in more shows. Probably Superior is one of the next ones on Netflix. So Netflix is going to start doing shows based on a lot of his comics. So if you like what you're seeing, more is coming in other fashion. That's why I think it's important to kind of understand the comic. And also that the comics are very cheeky and they're a bit dirty and sometimes at times obscene and violent. And that's how he writes. And it probably comes from being under that Marvel flagship for a while. When someone holds you under their thumb for a while, you can't do this, you can't do this, and you finally get free, you kind of just
exactly like how he poked at that Fox executive. That's very interesting. Boy, I'd love to see a Kick-Ass on Netflix, like something like that.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't think they will, but I would
understanding the deal, Fox still retains the rights to Kick-Ass and Kingsman for sure. I don't know where The Wanted falls on this. And I've also heard that they may have the rights to Superior, which is one of his next major comics. But he also has so much other stuff that he's done. But yeah, we're definitely not going to see Kick-Ass and the Kingsmen on Netflix. Those are two that Fox, they've got it. That's an independent deal that's already set. And he said it himself. He's tweeted and said that himself. That no, we're not going to. Those two specifically, you will not see on Netflix, unfortunately. So.
Yeah, well, that may be the case for now, unfortunately, but still, if this Millar world sounds like it could be a lot of fun. I liked Wanted, not to get into another movie review, but I didn't mind the film. It was not by far spectacular, but I loved the performance and definitely the premise of these people, these assassins, was pretty darn amazing, if you ask me. Very cool.
He likes that. He likes like kind of the spy secret organization type stuff. While it does have comic booky elements, he likes kind of based a little bit in reality, but over the top.
Right.
So that's what he writes.
Cool. All right. So now that we've talked about the Kingsmen, the Statesmen, the organizations themselves, the villains, we've talked about Elton John. We've talked about the comic books. What's next? What about sequels? What do we have to look forward to? What do you think? Where do you think they could go?
Well, I think they're set up for a sequel, but I think it's going to depend on what kind of money it makes. Since it didn't make great reviews, it's going to depend on the money.
Right.
If this makes money, I think they do another one. Now, will Vaughn come back? That's the interesting thing, because there was a lot leading up to the second Kingsman that it looked like Vaughn wasn't going to do it. For the longest time, it looked like he wasn't going to be involved, and Colin Firth wasn't going to be involved. So one thing I think is Firth may be done. It wouldn't shock me if he's done. And the fact that we lost Merlin. Merlin's played by Mark Strong. Another strong character of the Kingsmen. Gives me a little pause. But the movie ends with Channing Tatum in a suit. It's giving you the hint that Channing is going to be over here in London or in England with them. So maybe that's the transition. Maybe this becomes a co-franchise for Tatum and Egerton. Hard to say. And then maybe, like we kind of theorized, Roxy comes back.
Yeah, we're not sure. Yeah, we're not sure Roxy is completely gone, but that's the theory right now. And that scene was great because Channing Tatum was wearing a Kingsman suit and a bowler.
Mm-hmm.
So that gave me a big laugh. And he did go to the Kingsman tailor shop. So
that gives you another strong character to replace the few that you lost. So
right.
And Edgerton's getting involved in that Robin Hood thing. That's why they said there he might not even have been able to come back for Kingsman for a while. Between me and you, I don't think that Robin Hood thing's going to do shit. And it's no knock on him. I just think Robin Hood's done. It's just not going to do anything.
Yeah, so. I think. Well, as to Robin Hood, I think that's a whole other podcast, my friend. That's a whole other podcast, which we don't want to get into now, that's for sure. But I think you're right on a lot of these points. I think there's definitely room for a lot of sequels, and I hope this does well. And I hope that our opinion of this so far has leaned you at least into checking it out. Again, we always ask, no matter what we say, we always ask that you guys go out there and see the movies for yourselves. That's for sure.
Yeah, keep your expectations a little lower. I mean, like I said, this is going to knock it out of the park, and you're going to be like, oh, my God, the best movie ever made, the best spy movie, the best comic book movie, the best action movie, whatever. Just go and have fun. Be aware that there's going to be some cussing, some pretty hard cussing. Yeah,
some cussing, some violence, some strong sexuality or sexual moments. And just have fun. I think you're right. You know what? Just real quickly, I think critics go in trying to critique and find things right and wrong with stuff so much so they forget to just enjoy the film. Just have fun.
Yeah, like getting into like, oh, what about that camera and is this camera and the way he films things and blah, 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 blah.
Right. Yeah, unless we're talking about Scorsese or Spielberg, I don't want to talk about lighting or even James Cameron. Or camera angles and things like that. That's when you get into that kind of thing. There's a tradition and a place for that. But this is just a fun summer popcorn movie.
And he's created
or should we say
a great
fall
universe. This is a great universe. Yeah. Like I said, I want to see more movies in the Kingsman universe. I enjoy it. And I want to see, who knows, maybe they make an Asian team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A team from Japan or a team from China or something like that. And it has its own kind of.
Do you know what I kept thinking in my head? And you're going to laugh, and this is bad. I kept thinking, when the Statesman was revealed, and we knew they were coming, that this was America's version. I always think about Hogwarts and Quidditch, right? We never got to see the American team or the Japanese teams that were out there, or
we knew
they were out there. Yeah,
well, because it's hinted at. Because oh my God, now you're going to catch me because I'm off on my Harry Potter. But what's his name in the Goblet of Fire is a Quidditch player. Remember, he's competing in the Goblet of Fire from the other school,
right?
And he's from another country.
Hungary? I want to say Hungary. We'll have to do our research. Yeah. It's been so long, but that's what I thought of. And wouldn't it be cool to see a different version of this organization? You're right, in other countries. That would be fun.
Have a Japanese team and have Jackie Chan at the head of it. That'd be fucking awesome.
Wow. That's for sure. All right. I think it's about that time to kind of wrap things up. Andrew, any final thoughts on our movie this week, The Kingsman 2 Golden Circle?
No, I think it was a solid movie. It was a solid movie for this time of the year. Yeah, go check it out. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
I definitely agree. Please go see it, decide for yourself. And if you're listening to us, always let us know if you're catching us on YouTube, if you're catching us on Podomatic, if you're catching us on
Libsyn. We are making a transition to Libsyn coming up soon. We're going to be available on both Podomatic and Libsyn for the next month as we make this transition. Apologize for the inconvenience. We just think it's a better place to put our podcast at the moment. We'll let everyone know when we stop doing it on one or the other, or if it causes some kind of inconvenience with iTunes, or we're also joining Stitcher soon. So just other places to find us.
Exactly. So wherever you can find us, Libsyn, Podomatic, iTunes, YouTube, please subscribe, rate our channel, our podcast. Let us know how we're doing. Comment. You can tweet me at any time. You can find Felipe at voodoo_57. Andrew, where can they find you?
They can find me at Real Comics, REELCOMICS on Twitter.
And don't forget our podcast. You can find our podcast show and our podcast Twitter feed at REEL, REEL_podcast.
Yep.
All right, Andrew, I guess it's about that time. Shall we say so long?
Later.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And as always, be your own hero.